Hello, and welcome to Redeemer Longport on a Thursday afternoon in July. I am sitting in the parish hall of Redeemer looking out just over the Labyrinth. I can't quite see it from here, but it's just outside those bright windows. I couldn't find a way to sit near the Labyrinth so you could see it from here and still have me lit decently so you could see me and all that sort of thing. And so I'm doing the best I can with that, but we're in this beautiful room that we're not able to visit very much in this COVID time. And so one of the things that we do have going for us here at Redeemer that's really an asset and that people are using, and I see people using every day, is this wonderful outdoor labyrinth, which is a fine, good, safe place to come and do spiritual centering and gathering and spiritual work. So this is really a resource. And what I want to do this afternoon is talk a little bit about the Labyrinth, what it's about, where it came from, maybe some ways of walking it, some things you might want to think about when you're walking the Labyrinth, some possibilities for how it might fit into one's spiritual life. So let me tell you a little about me. My name is John Baker. I am one of the visiting priests here in Longport. This church is served by several priests who gather and serve it between early June and then early September. It's a summer chapel, and so there's several of us who come here, and I've been coming here for 20 years now. And I have a great love for this community, for its work here. And I have a great love for this labyrinth that's out here because it's been here the 20 years I've been coming. And I heard about it before I ever really knew about Longport because one of the visiting priests who was here for 30 years and has not been here, he died several years ago, was a friend of mine when I was in seminary. And he told me about this place that he visited every year and about the labyrinth that they had built. So he knew I had an interest in labyrinths in those days in the early 90s, and he did too. And so he was a motivating force for helping make this happen here. And the labyrinth has served Redeemer well for more than 20 years. So it's a great asset to the spiritual life of this place. So the labyrinth, there are labyrinths all over this country, and there are labyrinths all over the world in spiritual communities, church communities, sometimes in neighborhoods where they don't seem to have anything to do with a church or a spiritual community. I know of a vacant lot between two houses in Abington, Virginia, that's been developed into just a beautiful labyrinth. And I have to wonder, who are these people who come and walk this labyrinth on a regular kind of basis? I have been to labyrinths in Scotland. I have been to labyrinths in Paris. There are labyrinths all over this country from coast to coast. And they really started to grow and become popular in the early 90s. When a priest who was then at the cathedral in San Francisco, a woman named Lauren Artris, traveled to Chartres Cathedral, the Cathedral of Notre Dame in Chartres in France, and saw their labyrinth and began to look at it as a tool for pilgrimage and a tool for meditation, spiritual reflection, and was able to come back and write a book about her experience and about what she thought was helpful about walking labyrinths and using labyrinths. And she also wrote about how to build and how to design and how to do the outline of a labyrinth. And she gave great detail about the size and dimensions and the workings of that labyrinth at Chartres Cathedral. And so many of the labyrinths in our country grew out of that book and out of her teaching about the labyrinth as a spiritual tool. And many of the labyrinths in this country are modeled after the Chartres labyrinth, some of them like the one here at Redeemer, almost directly. I mean, measurement for measurement. Our labyrinth is a little over 40 feet in diameter, as is the one at Chartres. Our labyrinth has an advantage over there, and I'm going to try some screen sharing here. I'm not technically that savvy, but I think I can get us to this thing. Let's see what happens. So our labyrinth that you recognize here outside the church, and that you've seen many times if you've been in Longport, if you're a part of this community, certainly. Our labyrinth is very well designed. It's on a concrete slab that's a little higher in the center and arched so that water doesn't stand on it. It's carefully drawn exactly like the labyrinth at Chartres Cathedral, that looks like this. I'm going to try pushing play and see if I can do this. This, if you've looked at our labyrinth, if you spent any time on ours, and if you've walked it, you will know that this is it. This particular picture at Chartres has candles put in all the lumations, the 96 little coves around the outside of the labyrinth for an evening walk. And while our labyrinth is made in the same design as the Chartres Cathedral labyrinth, it's not a 13th century historic creation of old, wonderful, worn stones like theirs is, but it has a great advantage in that you will never find our labyrinth covered with chairs so that you can't walk it, which is often the case at Chartres. I have only been to the Chartres Cathedral one time to see that labyrinth, and it was covered with chairs. So often if you make the journey to Chartres from Paris on a short train ride, you find yourself unable to walk this thing because it's just not available. There are labyrinths of all different kinds, all, as I said, all over the world. This one is a labyrinth made of rocks at the conference center for the Diocese of Virginia, which is my diocese. This labyrinth is out in a field that has been cleared in the middle of the woods, and people walk this labyrinth often. People who've come for a week or a weekend of retreat. It's a common thing to see people walking this labyrinth, and several people can walk the labyrinth at one time. Certainly true of ours, as is true for this one. And I'll say more about that when I get to talking about how we walk the labyrinth. This labyrinth is a little different design, but it was built by pilgrims to the island of Iona in Scotland. This labyrinth is it's at a point on the end of the island called Columba Bay. And it is the place where Columba is said to have made his first landing when he traveled to Iona to begin that Iona community in the 6th century. He left Ireland and said he was going to find a new home and would not go back to Ireland, and ended up at Columba and at Iona. And it was from Iona that the Book of Kells came in the 8th century, that Saint Aidan, who is the patron saint of my home parish, came. And so this labyrinth is just in the middle of a field that's visited by sheep and pilgrims on a regular basis. My home parish, St. Aidan's, we had a Boy Scout who wanted to do an eagle project, and we had a big piece of land. And so this labyrinth was put in, and we have labyrinth walks fairly often, as well as people who come and just use the labyrinth on a regular basis. We made t-shirts to advertise our labyrinth, but all of these lead us back to Redeemer and the labyrinth that is a part of your life here. This, again, is modeled after that Chartres labyrinth, and it will look familiar as you see other labyrinths around the world. You'll say, hey, that looks like the one at home if you're from Redeemer. So some talk about labyrinths and what they're about. As I said, the Chartres labyrinth was built, it was put into that floor in the 13th century. And it was seen as a way for people who couldn't go on pilgrimages, say, to the Holy Land. It was a rough time to be trying to make a pilgrimage to the Holy Land. They were seen as ways for people to make a pilgrimage, to put one foot in front of the other and make a journey. Because in our tradition, certainly in the Christian tradition, which was where Chartres was coming from, but in the Judaic tradition, in Islam, making a journey, setting out on a journey and trusting yourself to be led on that journey is a central spiritual tenet of faith. Abraham, the Abrahamic faiths, Abraham's faith, we're told by Paul much later, Abraham's faith was that not that he knew what was going to happen, but that he went on the journey trusting that he would be led and he would find what he needed on that journey. Now, when we enter the labyrinth, we're certainly not handing our lives over to the care of another in the way that Abraham and Moses and, say, Jesus' disciples, when he said, "Come and follow me," when they did those sorts of things. But we are, in a way, beginning a time of walking, maybe 5 minutes, maybe 30 minutes, where we say, okay, I'm going to let go in trust and make this journey, hoping that along the way, I may gain some insight. I may clear my mind. It can be that simple as clearing your mind. You don't have to have much of a sense of God or divinity to walk the labyrinth. You can just do it and discover that there's something in that rhythm of moving around, of following that path, of trusting that path that is laid out for you so you don't have to decide where to go. There is a way to let go into the path and just let the path lead you in this roundabout way into the center of the labyrinth. And simply doing that can make a difference. People find it calming. People find walking the labyrinth to open them a little bit to an inner stillness that I think we all have, but we just don't always notice. The labyrinth is a way of freeing our minds a little bit. My feet are going to follow this path, so I don't have to worry about where I'm going. So I don't have to worry about that. I don't have to be in control of the next few moments. This path will lead me to the center and it will lead me back out again. So there's a way in which the labyrinth invites us to let go of the everyday, which is certainly what pilgrimage is about, which is what a faith kind of journey is about. There are people who practice a meditative form of walking. Some people just find themselves walking on a path in the woods and find themselves walking more slowly and more thoughtfully and intentionally. All of the spiritual systems, all religions tell us that there is, alongside our reason, our rational understanding and our sensory understanding, that there's another way of knowing that has to do with opening ourselves up to that inner still voice, to the kind of things that can't be explained rationally or through senses, things like love, awe, hope, trust, that those also are ways of knowing in life. And that what all the traditions tell us is that we need to nurture that way of knowing within us. The labyrinth is a tool to help us do that. On the labyrinth, we have a chance to kind of settle into ourselves. As pilgrims and walkers, we set out trusting the path. We don't need our senses or our reason to get us where we're going. You cannot get lost on the labyrinth. It's not a maze. Some people call it a maze, but a maze, you can get lost. The labyrinth is safe. It leads you to the center and it leads you back out. So this labyrinth has been here, as I said, for more than 20 years. And over those 20 years, I've seen people walk the labyrinth in all kinds of ways. I saw a family just the other day run the labyrinth together, and they seem to be having a great time. I walk the labyrinth slowly, usually, when I walk it. But I've noticed lately that there are people who come and walk it with all kinds of different approaches. I see people stop at the entrance to the labyrinth, sometimes stop and just think for a minute, maybe. One guy really kind of pumped his fist one morning. I looked out there and he was ready to go. And he walked very resolutely from the into the center of the labyrinth and back out. And there's no way to know what people are receiving. But when I see the same people come back again and again and again, I have to think that they're getting something worthwhile and something that they need in their lives out of this spiritual tool. So I want to suggest some possibilities for ways of walking the labyrinth. If you haven't walked it before and you're thinking about giving it a try, I hope you will. As I said, it's here all the time. People walk it day and night. Some people walk before sunup. Some people walk it long after sundown. It's just here to be walked. It's a wonderful resource. Um, if you want to try the labyrinth, or if you've walked it a lot and you kind of like to think about some other ways of approaching it, let me suggest a few basics. First, I do recommend that you stop at the beginning, at the entrance to the labyrinth. You've come this far. Maybe you've walked the neighborhood to get here, or maybe you've driven to be here. Maybe you've come here with something in your mind, or maybe you just thought it was a good day to walk the labyrinth. Maybe you just said, oh, I think I'll go do that, and you're not even sure why you came to do this. If you stop at the entrance to the labyrinth for just a minute, maybe you'll ask yourself a question or two. Maybe you'll say, you know, what is it that's on my mind? What is it that has brought me to this moment, to this time? What's cooking inside me? Maybe what is it that I'd like some help with? My people at my church back home know that if they show up for church a half hour early and see me walking the labyrinth, they know I'm looking for the end of my sermon, or maybe the middle of my sermon. I'm out there saying, get all that other stuff out of my head. Just let me be open to kind of hear what my insides are trying to tell me. Maybe one of the questions you ask at the beginning of the labyrinth, as you stand there before you enter, has to do with, what is it that I need some help with? What's on my mind? What am I seeking in this journey time? Is there something that I want? Is there something I want to have happen here? Is there something maybe that you'd like to set aside? Sometimes I approach the labyrinth, and people approach the labyrinth with something that's troubling, that you're not sure what to do with it. Well, you know, it's okay to set that right beside that entry point of the labyrinth. Just leave it there. It'll be there when you're ready to come out. But in the meantime, what would it be like? What kind of better thinking? What kind of better listening for the divine, for that inner voice, for my better self? What kind of listening might I do if I just trust that thing that I can't sort through quite at the entrance to the labyrinth, and walk without it for a time? Spend this time walking and wandering. Sometimes the labyrinth is a place to gain new perspective, new insight. And so it's okay to say, I'm going to leave some things behind for this moment, and work on being open to that new insight. That's certainly a possibility for starting. So begin intentionally is what I'm trying to say here, I think. And then walk at whatever pace works for you. I mentioned the family who was running the labyrinth. I have no idea what that experience is like. I haven't run the labyrinth. What I have found is that there are times when I seem to be invited to slow down on the labyrinth. There are times when walking fast, I notice that I'm walking quickly. And I remember that so much of my life is consumed with the idea that there are things I just have to get done, that have to be done on time or on a schedule. Maybe this path is a place where there isn't a schedule, and I can walk at whatever speed I want. And if I'm walking the labyrinth and I'm walking this funny path that takes us closer to the center for a time and then takes us farther away and then around and then closer to the center, so much like life and so many of our goals that isn't direct, but in the walking of this path, as I come to some little insight or some little moment of saying, there's an idea I might want to spend a minute or two with, feel comfortable to just stop in that moment and just be with that idea or that insight. You can walk the labyrinth fast, but you can also walk it slowly. And if it's necessary to stop along the way and say, what is this? Oh, okay. Yes, there's something here. Stop and acknowledge that. Just stop and enjoy that. Feel free to do that. Sometimes such moments can be gifts of the labyrinth. People report them all the time. When you arrive at the center of the labyrinth, be there for a while. Spend some time in the center. You did some work to arrive at this center. You were maybe looking for something or thinking about something on your way. You've gotten this far, you've gotten to the middle of the labyrinth. Um, Maybe look at where you are, where you've landed. I usually take a look at all directions. I look around, I've walked a circle, so I look back. I look this way for a minute and that way and that way. I see people sometimes sit down in the middle of the labyrinth. I see people who will lie down in the labyrinth. I come to the labyrinth sometimes, especially those rocky labyrinths. You often find in the center of those a few rocks stacked on each other, or maybe rocks and sticks or a small sculpture. Someone's walked into the labyrinth, they've sat down and they've constructed something, some sign that they were there. What's going on? What's going on now that you're at the center of this labyrinth? What has the experience of getting here been like? Once you start to head out, you head back out of the labyrinth. You can ask what has happened here. What has gone on? What has this been like? Has there been a quiet to this? Have I heard something that I want to carry out with me? And here's sometimes a big question. Did I have any sense that maybe I wasn't alone walking this labyrinth? You know, there is that great story about the disciples after the resurrection walking to Emmaus and discovering this stranger walking with them on the path, and it turned out to be Jesus, and they had no idea. They had no idea that this person who accompanied them along the way was in any way divine or anybody outside the ordinary, and yet it was this holy companion who had joined them in their walk. Walking the labyrinth can be a place where sometimes we're met by the divine, by a part of ourselves maybe we don't listen to that often, maybe a part of ourselves that has a different insight and can be our ally. Is there a thought or idea from this labyrinth walk that you want to revisit later in the day? Is there some piece you want to take with you? Some people walk the labyrinth with a notebook. I've seen people do that. I have seen people walk the labyrinth and spend an hour doing it. And it is only a quarter mile to the center and back. But it is a quarter of a mile to the center and back on our labyrinth, as is the one in Sharp. But some people just spend a lot of time at it and say, I'm going to walk into this place and spend all the time I need in this other kind of attention, this other kind of being, and see what I can take back out of this. I hope you'll come walk the labyrinth. I hope you're maybe one of those people who I see out here walking the labyrinth sometimes. I hope that over time, the labyrinth will give you gifts, and that you'll find those gifts and add to them by continuing the kind of work on your spiritual life that we can all do anytime we kind of step out of the everyday, step out of what has to be done, step away from all those other things that need our attention, and find a different way to be aware in a moment, of a different kind of awareness, of a different part of reality that we just don't always spend time with. Some people can sit still and meditate. The labyrinth is great for people who don't sit still and meditate very well. Some people say, I just cannot sit and meditate. Go find yourself a labyrinth. That's what the labyrinth is for. The labyrinth can be a place of journey. It can be a resource on a daily basis. There are people who walk this labyrinth, the same people every day. And it's a part of a daily practice. And I wonder sometimes what other part of practice, what other sorts of things those folks might do to be serious and intentional about being aware of the fullness of their life, even those quieter inner parts. So I hope this is helpful. I hope maybe this gives you some new insights or ways of thinking about being on the Labyrinth, of doing church, or of doing spirituality without church. We've discovered at St. Aidan's that our Labyrinth draws people who have no interest in coming to church. And we're really glad that we've been able to provide some sort of a space and some sort of a resource for those people who obviously want to connect with something deeper and yet aren't maybe eager to try doing that within a church. It is a great ministry for a church to provide such a resource for people of all kinds of faith or no kinds of faith, but who all can say that there is something more that they'd like to be in touch with. I think the Labyrinth gives us that, and I am so grateful that Redeemer has been able to provide this resource to the community. I hope you'll all make use of it. I thank you for being with us, and this video will be available for Labyrinth walkers to check out. I think it will be available on YouTube, so you can check it out again if you want to hear some piece of it at another time. Thank you for being with us.